The ultrasound room was supposed to be silent. Soft lights, a heartbeat on the screen, my pregnant wife's hand trembling in mine. Then the door exploded open. A furious HOA Karen screamed about unauthorized parking, and before anyone could react, a gunshot ripped through the private ultrasound room. Glass shattered. My wife screamed. The doctor dropped to his knees. That's when he stood back up, looked her dead in the eyes, and calmly said one sentence that changed everything. "I'm calling 911, and you just ruined your life. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. What city are you watching this video from right now? Drop your city name in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe that no one has the right to terrorize a family, especially not a pregnant woman, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, because stories like this need to be told. This isn't just a story about an HOA Karen. This is about entitlement, power, and the moment someone goes so far that there's no turning back. My wife and I walked into that clinic believing we were safe, believing this was just another joyful milestone. On the way to meeting our first child, we had no idea that a stranger with a badge, a clipboard, and a gun would turn the happiest day of our lives into a nightmare that would shake an entire community. And the worst part? She truly believed she was untouchable. Let me take you back to the moment everything went wrong. We had waited weeks for that morning, not because anything was wrong, but because everything finally felt right. My wife sat beside me in the car, one hand resting on her belly, the other gripping the edge of her coat, like she was afraid the moment might slip away if she didn't hold onto it tightly enough. The sky was pale and overcast, the kind of quiet morning that made the world feel paused. This was supposed to be one of those memories we'd smile about years later. The first ultrasound where the heartbeat was strong enough to hear. The day the pregnancy stopped being an idea and became real. The clinic was small but warm, tucked into a medical complex just off a residential street. We parked in a clearly marked visitor spot, right under a sign that read medical patients only. I double-checked it anyway, even joked about it, because where we lived, rules were treated like weapons. My wife smiled weakly and told me to relax. We were early. We were legal. We were just two people about to become parents. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and coffee. A television murmured quietly in the waiting room. Other couples sat with the same nervous excitement written all over their faces. Some whispered. Some held hands. Some stared at their phones, pretending not to be anxious. We checked in, sat down, and waited. My wife leaned her head against my shoulder. "What if they can't find the heartbeat?" she whispered. "They will," I said without hesitation. "And it'll be loud." She smiled, but I could feel her shaking just a little. When the nurse finally called her name, my heart jumped. We followed her down a narrow hallway into a dimly lit ultrasound room. The lights were low, the machine hummed softly, and the screen glowed like a small window into another world. This room felt sacred, private, safe. The technician was gentle, professional, calm. She explained everything before she did it. My wife lay back, lifted her shirt slightly, and squeezed my hand. The gel was cold. She laughed nervously. The technician adjusted the probe, frowned for a second, then smiled. "There it is," she said. The sound hit us like a wave. Fast, steady, alive. My wife burst into tears. Not quiet ones. The kind that come from deep inside your chest when something overwhelms you completely. I laughed and cried at the same time, pressing my forehead against hers. For a few seconds, the world disappeared. There was only that sound and the tiny life it represented. That's when we heard shouting. At first, it sounded distant, muffled by walls. A woman's voice, loud, angry, complaining about something. We both ignored it. Clinics attract stress people. It wasn't our concern. The shouting got closer. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. A door slammed. Someone yelled, "You can't just park wherever you want." The technician's smile faded. She paused, glanced toward the door, then tried to refocus on the screen. "Sorry about that," she said softly. "Sometimes people get confused about parking." The door handle rattled. Before anyone could react, the door swung open so hard it hit the wall. A woman stood there, breathing heavily, middle-aged, perfect hair, red lipstick, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge of authority. She scanned the room with open disgust, eyes locking onto my wife, lying exposed on the table. "You," she snapped. "Your car is illegally parked." I stepped forward immediately. "This is a private medical room," I said. "You need to leave." She ignored me completely and pointed past me with her pen. "I am the HOA compliance officer for this complex. I don't care what you're doing. You're blocking a reserved space." The technician stood up. "Ma'am, you cannot be in here. This is a medical procedure." My wife tried to sit up, panic flooding her face. "Please," she said. "I'm pregnant. Can you give us a minute?" That should have ended it. Any normal human being would have backed out, embarrassed, apologetic. But this wasn't a normal person. Her face twisted with rage, like my wife's vulnerability offended her. "Pregnant or not, rules are rules," she barked. "People like you think you're special." The technician reached for the phone. "I'm calling security." That's when the woman did something I still can't fully process. She reached into her purse. Time slowed down in that room. I remember thinking she was pulling out her phone, or keys, or some kind of badge. Instead, metal caught the light. A handgun. My wife screamed. I stepped in front of her, without thinking, my body moving before my brain could catch up. "Are you insane?" I yelled. "Put that down." The woman's hand shook, but her eyes were wild, locked on us. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she shouted. "You trespassed. You threatened me." "No one threatened you," the technician cried. The machine still hummed softly in the background, the heartbeat continuing, unaware of the danger inches away. My wife sobbed, curling inward, one hand protectively covering her stomach. "Please," she begged. "Please don't." The woman raised the gun higher, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't bluffing. She truly believed she was in the right, that her authority, her anger, her position in the HOA gave her the power to do anything she wanted, even here, even now. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it over the machine. I thought about our baby, about how this was supposed to be the safest place we could be, about how quickly joy had turned into pure fear. "Put it down," I said again, my voice shaking now. "This ends badly for you." She sneered. "You people always think you can get away with anything." Her finger tightened. The technician screamed. And in the split second before everything shattered, before sound and glass and chaos exploded into our lives, one thought burned through my mind with absolute clarity. This woman had no idea who she was dealing with. The second after that thought crossed my mind, the room seemed to tilt. Not physically, but emotionally, like the balance of the world had shifted and there was no going back. The woman didn't lower the gun. She didn't hesitate. She stood there in that doorway, like she owned the air we were breathing, like the walls of a medical clinic were no different from a sidewalk she patrolled with her clipboard and her sense of superiority. "Everyone calm down," she said, her voice trembling despite the authority she was trying to project. "I am licensed. I'm allowed to carry." Licensed. Allowed. Those words echoed in my head as my wife whimpered behind me. The technician stood frozen, phone half raised, eyes wide with terror. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't someone overstepping boundaries. This was someone who had brought a weapon into a private medical space and was waving it around like punctuation in an argument. "You need to leave," I said again, slower now, choosing every word carefully. "You are threatening a pregnant woman. Put the gun down and walk away." She laughed, actually laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made my skin crawl. "Threatening? Don't be dramatic. If you people followed the rules, none of this would have happened." My wife cried out, "We're in a doctor's office. What is wrong with you?" That question, so raw, so desperate, seemed to snap something in her. Her face hardened, jaw clenching like she'd been personally insulted. "What's wrong with me," she snapped, "is that I'm tired of entitled residents thinking the world revolves around them." The technician finally found her voice. "Ma'am, I am begging you. Please put the gun down. This is a medical emergency waiting to happen." For a split second, the woman hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the screen, to the image of our baby, to the pulsing heartbeat still visible, still alive. And then she scoffed. "You're manipulating me," she said. "I know how this works." That was when she stepped fully into the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud. My stomach dropped. That sound meant something final, something sealed. We were trapped in that room with her. She pointed the gun toward the floor, but she didn't holster it, didn't secure it. Her finger hovered far too close to the trigger. She started pacing, ranting now, words spilling out faster than her thoughts. About residents who didn't respect authority. About people who thought medical excuses made them special. About how she'd handled worse situations before. I realized then that this wasn't just about parking. This was about control. My wife's breathing grew shallow. I felt her nails dig into my arm as she tried not to hyperventilate. "I don't feel good," she whispered. "My chest hurts." That snapped me into action. "Stop," I said firmly. "She's not okay. You are causing a medical emergency." The woman rolled her eyes. "She's fine. People fake this all the time." The technician moved toward my wife, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. "Her blood pressure is spiking," she said urgently. "Stress like this can cause complications." That word, complications, finally seemed to register, not with concern, but with annoyance. "Then hurry up," the woman snapped. "Finish whatever you're doing so you can move your car." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity, the cruelty, the complete lack of humanity. "You don't get to rush an ultrasound," I said through clenched teeth. "You don't get to be in here. And you definitely don't get to hold a gun over my wife." She turned on me, eyes blazing. "I can do whatever I want on this property." "No," a calm voice said from behind me. We all froze. The doctor had entered quietly through the side door. Tall, composed, white coat crisp. His eyes took in the scene in a single sweep, the gun, my wife's distress, the technician's fear. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply said, "You need to leave now." The woman spun toward him. "And who are you supposed to be?" "I'm her doctor," he replied. "And you are endangering my patient." She smirked. "Then you should tell them not to break HOA rules." The doctor's jaw tightened. "This is a medical clinic. HOA authority does not extend into exam rooms." She took a step toward him. That's when the gun went off. It wasn't deliberate. I know that now. It was chaos. Her hand jerked as she gestured, her finger tightening unintentionally. The sound was deafening in that small room. A violent crack that shattered the air and my sense of reality. At the same time, glass exploded. The ultrasound screen shattered, sparks flying as the bullet ripped through it and embedded itself in the wall inches from where my wife's head had been moments earlier. My wife screamed, a sound I will never forget. Pure terror, pure pain. The technician dropped to the floor. The smell of burned plastic and gunpowder filled the room. "Everyone down," the doctor shouted. I threw myself over my wife, shielding her with my body as alarms began blaring somewhere in the building. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. My ears rang. For a terrifying second, I didn't know if anyone had been hit. The woman stood there, frozen, staring at the smoking hole in the wall. "Oh my God," she whispered. It just went off." Silence followed. Thick, heavy, broken only by my wife's sobs and the faint, horrible realization settling over all of us. She had fired a gun inside a prenatal ultrasound room. The doctor stood up slowly, his expression no longer calm. It was cold, focused, controlled. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911, he said clearly. "And you are not leaving." The woman's face drained of color. "You can't do that," she said weakly. "This was an accident." He looked her dead in the eyes. So was every crime until consequences arrived. She took a step back toward the door. The doctor's voice cut through the chaos like steel. "Move again," he said, "and I will personally testify to everything that just happened." In that moment, as sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, it finally dawned on her. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was a felony. For a few seconds after the gunshot, no one moved. It felt like the air itself had frozen thick and heavy, pressing down on our chests. My ears rang so loudly, I could barely hear my own breathing. The smell of gunpowder burned my nose, mixing with the sharp scent of disinfectant and melted plastic from the destroyed ultrasound machine. The screen that had shown our baby's heartbeat moments earlier now hung in pieces, wires sparking weakly like dying fireflies. My wife was shaking uncontrollably beneath me. Her sobs were raw, panicked, and broken, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere deeper than fear. I lifted my head just enough to look at her face. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, tears streaming down her temples. "Are you hit?" I asked desperately, running my hands over her arms, her shoulders, her stomach. My fingers trembled so badly, I could barely feel what I was touching. I don't know, she gasped. "My ears. I can't hear, right?" The technician was curled up on the floor near the wall, hands over her head, whispering over and over, "Oh my God, oh my God." The doctor stood rigid, his body positioned between the woman and the rest of us, his eyes locked on her hands like a hawk watching a snake. The woman herself looked like a statue. Her arm was still extended, the gun dangling uselessly now, smoke curling from the barrel. Her mouth hung open, lips pale, eyes fixed on the hole in the wall as if she couldn't believe what she had done. "I didn't mean to," she muttered. "It was an accident. An accident." I felt something inside me snap. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something heavier. "Drop the gun," the doctor said, his voice steady but hard. "Now." She didn't respond. Her hand twitched. "Drop it," he repeated louder. The sound of a heavy object hitting the floor echoed through the room as the gun slipped from her fingers. It skidded across the tile and came to rest near the technician. She scrambled away from it like it was alive. The doctor kicked it out of reach and stepped back, keeping his eyes on the woman. "Sit down," he ordered, "against the wall. Hands where I can see them." She obeyed slowly, collapsing against the wall like her legs had suddenly forgotten how to work. Her clipboard lay abandoned, near the door, the pages scattered, ridiculous now in the face of what had just happened. My wife started to gasp for air, her breaths coming too fast, too shallow. Panic attack. I recognized it instantly. Hey, I whispered, cradling her head. Look at me. Look at me." Slow breaths. "I'm here." The doctor turned his attention to her immediately. "We need to check her vitals," he said to the technician, who nodded shakily and crawled back to the machine's side. What was left of it anyway? "I'm calling a code," the doctor added, already pulling out his phone again. His hands were steady, professional, controlled, like this chaos was something he was trained to face, even if it had no business being here. As he spoke into the phone, my mind raced. Had the gunshot hurt the baby? Could stress alone do damage? Every horror story I'd ever heard about pregnancy complications flooded my thoughts at once. I pressed my ear to my wife's belly, as if I could hear something, anything, that would reassure me. Sirens grew louder outside. Red and blue lights flickered faintly through the blinds, painting the walls in frantic flashes. The woman suddenly started crying. Loud, dramatic sobs that cut through the room. "This is blown out of proportion," she wailed. "I was doing my job. They were aggressive. I felt threatened." I looked up slowly. "You fired a gun?" I said, my voice shaking with fury. "In a prenatal exam room." She glared at me through tears. "If you hadn't argued with me, this wouldn't have happened." The doctor snapped his head toward her. "You are done speaking," he said sharply. "Every word you say right now is making this worse for you." She fell silent, lips trembling, eyes darting toward the door like she was calculating escape. The technician wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my wife's arm. "It's high," she said, voice unsteady. "Very high." My heart sank. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor replied carefully, "we need to get her stable immediately." The baby monitor was gone. Destroyed. The machine that had given us joy minutes ago was now useless, its screen shattered beyond repair. Another machine would be needed. Another room. More movement. More stress. And all of it because someone couldn't stand being told no. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Voices shouted commands. The door burst open again, this time with authority that couldn't be ignored. Police. Hands where we can see them. Two officers rushed in, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the scene. The doctor raised his hands slowly and pointed toward the woman on the floor. "She's the one with the firearm," he said calmly. "The weapon is on the floor. No one else is armed." The woman started sobbing again. "Thank God you're here," she cried. "These people attacked me. I was scared for my life." The officers ignored her theatrics and moved quickly. One secured the gun. The other approached her, ordering her to lie face down. She protested weakly, complaining about her shoulder, about her rights, about how unfair this all was. They cuffed her anyway. As they lifted her up, she twisted her head toward me and my wife. Her eyes burned with hatred. "You did this," she hissed. "You ruined my life." I stared back at her, exhausted, shaking, holding my pregnant wife together with everything I had left. "No," I said quietly. "You did." Paramedics rushed in moments later, their presence a blur of motion and clipped commands. They placed my wife on a stretcher, hooked her up to monitors, checked her pupils, her pulse, her oxygen levels. "Is the baby okay?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We'll know more at the hospital," one of them said, honestly. "Right now, we're focusing on keeping her calm and stable." They wheeled her out of the room, past shattered glass and scorched walls, past officers taking photos and bagging evidence. I walked beside her, holding her hand, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. As we reached the ambulance, I glanced back once. The ultrasound room door was wide open, the sacred space destroyed, crime scene tape already going up. The woman sat handcuffed on a chair in the hallway, surrounded by officers, her face pale and empty. For the first time since the morning began, the reality hit me with full force. Our lives had been split in two by a single gunshot, and whatever came next, hospital tests, police reports, courtrooms, it would never be simple again. The ride to the hospital felt unreal, like I was watching my own life through someone else's eyes. The ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting off the flashing lights and the chaos outside, but the tension didn't leave with them. It settled inside my chest, heavy and unmoving. My wife lay strapped to the stretcher, oxygen mask over her face, her skin pale and damp with sweat. I held her hand as tightly as I dared, terrified that if I let go, something worse would happen. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Please, just keep breathing." She nodded weakly, eyes glassy, fighting to focus on me while her body shook with aftershocks of fear. The paramedics spoke in calm, practiced tones, calling out numbers, adjusting lines, checking monitors. Every beep felt like a verdict, waiting to be delivered. When we arrived at the hospital, everything moved fast. Too fast. Doors flew open. Voices overlapped. Bright lights burned my eyes as they wheeled her down the hallway. I jogged beside them, answering questions, automatically my brain barely keeping up. Gunshot trauma. Severe stress. High blood pressure. Pregnancy. Those words followed us like a curse. And then, suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Bring her straight to OB Triov," the doctor said firmly. I looked up. It was him. Her husband. The doctor from the clinic. He was already pulling on gloves as he walked, his expression sharp and focused, the kind of calm you only see in someone who has faced emergencies before and knows exactly what to do next. He didn't look at the chaos. He didn't look at the police officer trailing behind us to take statements. His eyes were only on my wife. "I'm here," he told her gently. "You're safe now. I've got you." Something in his voice finally broke through her panic. Her breathing slowed, just a fraction. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, but her grip on my hand loosened slightly, like she trusted that she could let go for a moment. Inside the exam room, he took control immediately. Orders were given. Machines were brought in. A new ultrasound was set up, sleek and intact, nothing like the shattered one we'd left behind. Nurses moved quickly, efficiently, their faces serious but reassuring. "I need everyone to stay calm," he said, and somehow they did. He turned to me then, really looked at me for the first time since the shot was fired. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, shielding her, staying calm. "She needs that right now." I nodded, unable to speak. As they worked, a police officer stepped closer, notepad in hand. "Sir, when you're able, we'll need a statement." The doctor's head snapped up. "Not right now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My patient comes first." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Understood." That was when it truly sank in. This wasn't just a scared husband anymore. This was a doctor in his domain. And no one was going to override him. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the new ultrasound probe moved across my wife's stomach. I watched the screen, barely breathing. The doctor leaned in, his eyes scanning, his face unreadable. "Please," I whispered under my breath. "Please be okay." Then he smiled. "Just a little." "There," he said softly, heartbeat still strong. The sound filled the room again, just like before, but this time it carried something heavier with it. Relief mixed with grief for what had been stolen from us. My wife sobbed openly now, the tension finally cracking, and I pressed my forehead to hers, tears streaming freely down my own face. "You're okay," I told her again and again. "You're both okay." But the doctor wasn't done. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, honestly. "Her blood pressure is still elevated. Stress-like that can trigger complications. We're admitting her for observation." "Whatever you need," I said immediately. "Anything." As they settled her into a private room, the reality of what had happened began to catch up to me. The adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion and rage in its place. I replayed the scene over and over in my head, the gun, the scream, the shattered glass, each time feeling my hands shake all over again. The doctor pulled me aside once my wife was resting, sedatives helping her finally drift into a light sleep. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. My stomach clenched. "Is something wrong?" "Medically, she's stable for now," he assured me. "But what happened back there? That wasn't just reckless. It was criminal." I nodded. "She nearly killed my wife." "She nearly killed a patient," he corrected gently, "and endangered a child. That distinction matters." He explained what would happen next. Incident reports, mandatory hospital notifications, cooperation with law enforcement. He spoke clearly, methodically, laying out the process like he was building a case brick by brick. "I've already called hospital legal," he added, "and risk management. What happened in that clinic will not be brushed aside." I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar then. Not fear, not anger. Hope. "What about the HOA?" I asked. She kept claiming authority. His eyes hardened. "HOA authority ends where the law begins." And she crossed that line so violently there may be no going back. Later that night, as my wife slept, police finally returned for my statement. I told them everything, from the parking spot to the gunshot, from the way she spoke to the way she held the weapon. I watched their expressions shift from neutral to grim as the picture became clear. She brought a loaded firearm into a medical exam room. One officer said, quietly, "That alone is serious." "And firing it?" I asked. "That's a felony," he replied. "Multiple, actually." As dawn crept in through the hospital window, painting the room in pale light, I sat alone with my thoughts. The doctor stepped in once more, checking monitors, adjusting settings, his movements calm and precise. He paused before leaving. "I've seen a lot," he said softly, "but what happened to your family? That kind of entitlement is dangerous, and people like that rely on others being too afraid to push back." I looked at my sleeping wife, at the steady rise and fall of her chest, at the tiny life still fighting inside her. "Not this time," I said. He nodded. "No, not this time." And for the first time since that door had burst open, I believed it. By the time the sun fully rose, the hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like the calm center of a storm that was still raging just beyond the walls. My wife slept fitfully, monitors beeping in slow, steady rhythms that I clung to like lifelines. Every time her breathing changed, my heart skipped. Every time she stirred, I leaned forward, afraid the fear would come rushing back all at once. It didn't take long for reality to arrive. Two detectives entered the room mid-morning, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. They were calm, professional, but there was a weight to the way they looked at us, like they already knew this wasn't just another incident report. "We're sorry to disturb you," one of them said quietly, glancing at my wife before lowering his voice. "We need to go over what happened in detail." I stepped into the hallway with them, closing the door gently behind me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they began asking questions. Where were we parked? What exactly did she say? How did she hold the weapon? Did she ever point it directly at anyone? I answered everything carefully, slowly, forcing myself not to rush. I didn't want emotion to cloud the facts. Every detail mattered. When I finished, one detective exchanged a look with the other. "You should know," he said. "We've already reviewed the clinic security footage." My stomach tightened. And it matches your statement completely." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by something colder when he continued. "There's more. They told me the clinic had multiple cameras, hallway, parking lot, and one outside the exam room door. The footage showed the woman storming into the building, shouting at the front desk staff, ignoring repeated requests to leave. It showed her forcing her way down the hallway. It showed her entering the exam room without consent. And most damning of all, it showed her drawing the gun. She claimed she felt threatened, the detective said flatly. But the video doesn't support that. At all. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. She also claimed the gun discharged accidentally while she was trying to secure it. He added, "But our firearms expert disagrees." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The trigger was pulled," he said, "with pressure. That doesn't happen by itself." I felt sick. They explained that residue tests confirmed she had fired the weapon. Ballistics matched the bullet lodged in the clinic wall. Photos documented the destroyed ultrasound machine, the shattered glass, the scorch marks inches from where my wife's head had been. "This could have been a fatality," the second detective said quietly. "Multiple, actually." As if that weren't enough, the truth kept unraveling. The woman wasn't just an HOA compliance officer. She wasn't even supposed to be armed. Her concealed carry permit had expired months earlier. "And there's more," the detective said, his tone hardening. "She was already under investigation." That made my blood run cold. For what? Harassment, threats, abuse of authority. Multiple residents have filed complaints against her. This wasn't an isolated incident. Suddenly, everything made sense. The confidence, the entitlement, the way she'd spoken like consequences were something that happened to other people. She'd been getting away with it for a long time. Until now. Later that afternoon, the doctor returned with paperwork of his own. Incident reports, hospital legal forms, statements from staff. "We've suspended the clinic operations for the day," he said, "and the medical board is being notified." I frowned. The medical board? Because bringing a firearm into a medical exam room violates multiple safety regulations, he explained, and the HOA's involvement on this property is about to come under serious scrutiny. My phone buzzed constantly. Unknown numbers, voicemails, news alerts. Local media had picked up the story. A gun discharged inside a prenatal ultrasound room. A pregnant woman hospitalized. HOA officer arrested. The headlines spread faster than I ever expected. That evening, an officer returned to inform us the woman had been formally charged. Multiple counts: assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, illegal possession of a firearm, trespassing, interfering with medical care. She's being held without bail pending arraignment, he added. I sat down heavily in the chair beside my wife's bed. Without bail. Those words felt unreal. But the most shocking revelation came the next day. The HOA board contacted us, not with an apology, with a threat. Their legal representative left a voicemail claiming the HOA was not responsible for the actions of an independent compliance officer and warning us against defamation. I played the message for the doctor. He didn't even hesitate. That was a mistake, he said calmly. On their part. Hospital legal got involved immediately. So did the city. Turns out, the HOA had authorized her to enforce parking policies at medical facilities, something they had no legal right to do. They crossed a line long before she pulled that trigger, the doctor explained. And now it's all coming out. Residents began reaching out. Stories poured in. People she'd threatened, fined unfairly, followed, intimidated. One elderly man described her pulling a gun during a parking dispute months earlier, but he'd been too afraid to report it. I felt anger rise in my chest like a fire. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was a pattern, a system that had allowed a dangerous person to wield power unchecked. My wife woke later that day, clearer, calmer, though the fear still lingered behind her eyes. Is she going to jail? She asked quietly. Yes, I said without hesitation. She is. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from release, from knowing that what happened to her mattered, that it wouldn't be swept under the rug. As night fell, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere out there, an entire organization was scrambling, lawyers were making calls, stories were being rewritten, but the truth had already escaped. A gun had gone off in a room meant to protect life, and no amount of authority, paperwork, or excuses could change that. What none of us knew yet, what no one was prepared for, was how far the fallout would go once this reached a courtroom. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling, sterile, unforgiving, stripped of emotion. It was the kind of place where excuses went to die. My wife sat beside me, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, her posture stiff but determined. She hadn't wanted to come at first. The memory of that day still haunted her dreams. But she refused to let fear decide the ending of our story. Across the room, the woman sat at the defense table. She looked smaller now. No clipboard, no red lipstick, no confident smirk. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her hands folded in her lap, like she was trying to hold herself together by force. When her eyes flicked toward us, there was no rage this time, only calculation. The kind that searches for sympathy where none exists. The judge entered, and the room snapped to attention. What followed was not fast. Justice rarely is. The prosecution laid out the charges one by one, each count heavier than the last. Assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, illegal discharge of a firearm, trespassing, interference with medical care. Each charge was supported with evidence, clear, undeniable, merciless. They played the security footage. Watching it again felt like being dragged back into that room. The shouting, the forced entry, the gun appearing in her hand. My wife squeezed my fingers until they went numb as the sound of the gunshot echoed through the courtroom speakers. Several jurors flinched. One covered her mouth. The defense tried to spin it. They talked about stress, about misunderstanding, about how she never intended to harm anyone. Then the firearms expert took the stand. He explained calmly and precisely how the trigger had been pulled with deliberate pressure, how accidental discharge was not consistent with the evidence, how the angle of the bullet placed it dangerously close to my wife's head. Next came the clinic staff, the technician, the front desk receptionist. Each told the same story. Each confirmed the same pattern of aggression and entitlement. And then the doctor testified. He stood tall, composed, unshaken. He spoke not as an emotional husband, but as a medical professional. He explained what stress like that does to a pregnant patient, how elevated blood pressure can lead to strokes, miscarriages, stillbirths, how the gunshot alone could have caused fatal complications. This was not a parking dispute, he said firmly. This was a violation of medical safety and human decency. The defense shifted uncomfortably. Then came the twist no one expected. The prosecution called an HOA board member to the stand. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Under oath, He admitted that the woman had been encouraged to be aggressive with enforcement, that complaints against her had been ignored, that no proper training had been provided, that they had known about her expired carry permit and said nothing. The judge's expression darkened. Emails were entered into evidence, messages from residents begging for help, warnings from staff members that she was out of control. And the HOA's response? Handle it quietly. The courtroom buzzed. The defense objected repeatedly, but it was too late. The truth was no longer containable. When my wife took the stand, the room went silent. She spoke softly, but every word landed like a hammer. She described lying on that table, hearing her baby's heartbeat, seeing a gun pointed in her direction, thinking, for one horrifying second, that she might die and take her child with her. I still hear the sound, she said, her voice trembling, every time I close my eyes. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The verdict came quickly. Guilty, on all counts. The woman broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the judge read the sentence: multiple years in prison, loss of firearm rights, permanent restraining orders, mandatory psychological evaluation. But the fallout didn't stop there. The HOA collapsed under the weight of its own negligence. The city launched an investigation. Fines were issued. Board members resigned. Civil lawsuits followed. The HOA's authority over the medical complex was revoked entirely. News outlets ran follow-up stories for weeks. HOA abuse of power leads to criminal conviction. Pregnant woman's ordeal exposes dangerous enforcement practices. The community changed. Residents who had once been silent found their voices. Policies were rewritten. Oversight was implemented. Fear lost its grip. As for us, healing came slowly. Our baby was born months later, healthy, strong, perfect. The delivery room was quiet this time, safe. When I held that tiny life in my arms, I thought back to the shattered ultrasound screen, the gunshot, the chaos, and I realized something important. Evil often hides behind authority. It wears badges, carries clipboards, claims to be just doing its job. But when ordinary people refuse to stay silent, when truth is spoken and documented, even the most entitled abuser can fall. That woman thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. And every time I look at my child, I'm reminded that standing up, no matter how terrifying, can change more than just your own life. Sometimes it changes everything. If this story shook you, it should have, because what happened to my family didn't start with a gun. It started with unchecked power, with someone who believed authority meant control, and rules mattered more than human life. If you've ever felt small in front of someone abusing their position, if you've ever stayed silent because you thought no one would listen, let this be your reminder that silence is exactly what people like that depend on. Speak up, document everything, protect your family, and never let anyone convince you that your fear doesn't matter. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings, lessons, and proof that justice can happen when people refuse to back down. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from, and if you've ever faced someone like this in your own life. Your voice might help someone else realize they're not alone. And most importantly, share the story, because the more people hear the truth, the harder it becomes to hide behind power. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. And I'll see you in the next story.